So, welcome to suggestED. I wanted to talk a little bit today about seeing a counselor, seeing a therapist. And I've had different kinds of questions over the years, and I wanted to address some of the most common ones, the ones that kind of make a lot of sense to me that I think are important for people to understand. And one of the very first ones is, when should I see a counselor? I am of the opinion that most people, under most circumstances, don't need to see a therapist. You can go your whole life without ever having seen a professional counselor. But that is with the view of thinking that seeing a counselor or seeing a therapist is kind of a big deal. If your view of talking to a counselor is that it is just me getting some extra support from someone, then seeing a counselor is entirely kind of a normal thing to do. It's the kind of thing that could happen frequently over a person's lifetime. Because most of the things that happen in our lives we're able to deal with from our own resources or with the resources of our network. So if that's your attention, that's your view on it, then you go ahead and you make a booking and you kind of follow the process that I want to talk about with you today at any time that makes sense. But if it's only going to be for very big things, then as I say, I would expect very few people would end up seeing a therapist because there are very few times in our lives that things are really kind of beyond what we know how to do, that we're not able to kind of muddle through on our own. In terms of making the decision to see a therapist, to talk to somebody, I think it's kind of best if you're able to do this, depending again on what your network is like, if you're able to get names from people that you trust. So obviously family and friends, if you've got a good med doctor, clergy, all of these people usually have access to helping professionals, and they can give you some ideas, people with whom they've worked or they've heard about. It's nice if you've got a variety of people with which to work. So you've got some options there. You don't feel like you have to go with any particular person, and you can look for a best fit. But that's not always the case. One of the options that has, especially over time, become more common is to look at distance counseling. And distance counseling can include by video, so using any of the video platforms that are available out there. Obviously by telephone is also another option. I have always in my own work as a therapist wanted to make sure that clients know very typically, almost always, by distance is less effective than it is in person. There's a variety of reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with being present with somebody else physically in the same space, allows us to read body language, allows us to pick up other kinds of cues that are really helpful, I think, for an attentive therapist to have, and probably also for the client to be able to make use of in return as well. It's part of the communication. It's worthwhile for you to be able to interview a potential counselor. To be honest, that happens very rarely with me. Most of the time, clients who choose to come and see me feel, I guess, comfortable enough that they want to book with me for various reasons. But I think it's worthwhile for you to have a bit of a conversation. Usually by telephone that's going to happen because a telephone consult, most counselors, most therapists are not going to charge you for. It's considered to be kind of a normal part of the process. And so you can ask questions that are important to you. And some of those might include education, knowing that your counselor has got probably an advanced degree, what kind of experience this person has, other qualifications and certifications, as well as understanding fees. When it comes to fees, a question that is often asked is, are my fees reimbursable? And different therapists have got different policies about that. Some therapists will merely have you pay out of pocket and then have you pursue reimbursement if that's possible. And some therapists will bill to third party. If that matters to you, and it does make sense that people like to have things, have financial help when it's available, if that matters to you, that is, I think, your responsibility to check your jurisdiction and the qualifications of the particular therapist that you're talking to are things that are really important for you to understand. There's all kinds of details there. You're also trying to make sure that this counselor seems to be able to support you and your values, what's important to you, in relation to the goals that you're seeking. So there's philosophical concepts in there as well as practical. So philosophically, you're looking at, do we share generally the same worldview? Do we take the same kind of assumptions in common? And practically, does it seem that this therapist has the ability to help me to work along this process? And it really is a process. Almost every case, we're looking at a process as being perhaps more important than the goal itself, although the goal comes about as a result of that process. So you're looking at that. You may be able to ask some direct questions about that, or it may be a sense that kind of comes to you as you're in conversation. It's entirely reasonable for you to book a single session to discuss how the process might unfold, to see if this therapist is likely going to be able to help you without you making kind of what we might call a full commitment. In fact, to me, and I think any reasonable therapist would have this in mind as well, you have never got a full commitment to your counselor. At any point, you are able to break that relationship, what we call the therapeutic alliance. You're working with this particular person. The therapist is your employee and needs to be attentive to the goals and what you want from this process. If that's not happening, then I think you have an obligation to yourself and kind of to the therapist to be able to talk about it if things aren't advancing. Talk about what is it that seems to be stuck. Talk about what the options are to get unstuck and see if that's going to be possible. If it's not, certainly you can change therapists. Although, and again, I don't think this happens too commonly, there can be a real problem with clients jumping from therapist to therapist without just cause. Again, it is a process. And that process, research says, is very grounded in the relationship that is developed, the professional therapeutic relationship that is developed between the client or clients and the therapist. When we're talking about clients, if you're looking at marital therapy or family therapy, my background is as a marriage and family therapist, so I'm kind of pretty attentive to these ideas. If you're looking at working with a therapist and someone or some others as well, then one of the responsibilities a therapist has is to make sure that there's proper support for all people, so that every individual there is properly engaged in the process and people are not being unduly singled out. The combination of the relationship and the interactions in the relationship is often the way that we would look at what the dynamic, the problem dynamic, if we can phrase it that way, is. Rather than about being a person, it's about processes, it's about techniques, it's about those kinds of things that are taking place. For those of you who are looking at relationship counseling, particularly marital counseling, and your spouse is not interested, at least not interested at this point in pursuing counseling, there can still be value in you getting counseling. And I'm not speaking simply value for you, but value for your relationship. Because every person that's in the relationship contributes to and co-creates the relationship. So if you're developing your skills, if you're developing your attitudes and understandings better, that should pay off in the relationship. At the same time, because it is a relationship, one person cannot be simply responsible for the entire thing. And so you need to understand that it will not likely transform the relationship. That's not at all to be expected fundamentally, as well as therapy is not being done with your spouse. The therapy exists with you, and the ripple effects may be happening through you to the relationship, and hopefully also helping with your spouse. If you've got questions that you would like answered in any of these suggested episodes, including about this topic, this can be revisited. So I encourage you to make comments, let us know about that. But thanks for watching.